Hi everybody, and welcome to Facebook Friday on Friday the 4th of December 2020. I'm just thinking that we need to start telling people the years because this seems to be something that we're going to keep doing by the sound. So I'm Kate Wakelin, I'm from Neuroendocrine Cancer Australia, and I'm the NET patient support nurse. And welcome to everybody who's joining us. And you will see from the video that we actually have a guest with us today, which is fantastic. So this is Erin Laing from Peter MacCallum Cancer Centre in Melbourne. I'll be introducing Erin a little bit more in a moment, but just before I go any further, I would just like to take this opportunity to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that I am broadcasting to you from, which is the land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. And I would just like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. Lots of you hear this all the time because I know lots of you watch these videos every week, but one of the things I really love to do where I live is go running along the Yarra River, which in the Woiwurrung language is called the Birrarung. So that helps me stay grateful for where I am, because it's such a beautiful part of the world. And there's been a few tiger snakes, which has been a bit fun, but we try not to focus too much on the tiger snakes and try and enjoy the wombats and the platypuses around my area of the world. So just knowing that everybody who's joining us is beaming in from all corners of Australia, and just wanted to extend that acknowledgement of country to where you are joining me from, and also people internationally. So welcome. It's really great to be with you, and I'm so excited to welcome Erin Laing. So Erin is a specialist NET dietitian with Peter MacCallum Cancer Centre, and lots of you will have tuned in for our webinar, which was earlier this week, where Erin presented the results from her PhD research into the nutritional and supportive care needs of people with NETs, but also looking at health professionals' levels of knowledge and levels of expertise and information needs about NETs. So we're not going to go over that research today, because we'll make sure there's a link to that webinar in the notes. It was really comprehensive, and lots of people. We've had about 150 people have a look at the YouTube video afterwards, which is really great. But we'll make sure there's a link to that in the notes afterwards. So what we know and what we expected, which is why we kind of lined this up a few weeks ago, is that from that webinar, we wouldn't have a chance to address too many questions on the night, and we also knew that diet is one of the areas that people most need information and answers to their questions about. So we wanted to make sure there was an opportunity for our NET community to really grill Erin and get some ideas and information about how they might be managing some of their challenges in this area. So Erin, thank you so much. We are so grateful to you for, twice in a week, spending time with us and our patient community to help get them informed about nutrition and NETs. So welcome.
Thanks, Kate. Happy to be here. And
Fantastic.
Hello, everybody.
Thank you. Okay, so what you can do if you're watching this live, obviously, if you're watching it on YouTube later, you get to listen to Erin's comments about the questions that we've got on the screen at the time. But if you're watching this live via our Facebook group, which I can see quite a few people have tuned in, feel free to put your questions in the comments for Erin, and I will attempt to introduce those into the conversations. But we're going to start actually, because lots of people actually emailed me before the webinar and said, I've got this question or that concern, and then quite a lot of people put comments in the webinar as well with various questions that we didn't get to all of them. So I promised everybody that we would start with those questions that we didn't get to last week, and we'll see where we end up with that. So I'm just going to bring the list up on the screen, and I'm just wondering, maybe it might be, and sorry, Erin, I'm going to sort of spring things on you, so you'll just it'll be a bit of a surprise package of what I ask first. We talked at the webinar, we talked about vitamin B3, and maybe it would be great if it's okay just to recap, if that's all right, about why we're focusing particularly on vitamin B3 when people have neuroendocrine cancer. And then there was a specific question around if a vitamin B3 supplement is recommended, are there foods that you can eat that will help boost those levels? So it's a bit of a double-barreled one, Erin. If you could just give us a quick background as to why we're talking about vitamin B3, but also about diet foods that are rich in vitamin B3. And is it worth going there with the foods, or do we need to jump straight to tablets?
Yep, no, really good question, and I get asked this a lot. I think a lot of health professionals want to know this answer too, so they can, you know, obviously manage this the best they can in nets. So the B3 niacin, it's also known as, is a potential deficiency in patients with neuroendocrine tumours. The reason being is it's probably particularly people with a high production of serotonin through their NET, or with carcinoid syndrome. So someone who's got a lot of carcinoid syndrome symptoms. So that's the combination of that flushing, diarrhea, to bloating, cramping. So if you're someone in that situation, sorry, there's a call coming through on my computer. It's interrupting me. It's probably my husband.
This is what happens when we go live.
I know. Anyway,
are you okay? Do we need to take a moment just for you to be able to?
I'm just going to tell him stop calling me.
Go away. We're busy.
Sorry, everyone. So essentially those people with sort of a serotonin producing NET, or with carcinoid syndrome, there's a risk that there is going to be a deficiency in B3 or niacin. And the reason that is because normally one of our amino acids that we get through our diet, called tryptophan, is converted to niacin to help with, you know, general energy metabolism processes in the body, but it's also converted to serotonin. So when you've got a NET that produces a lot of serotonin, that amino acid preferentially converts to serotonin rather than to niacin, and that can lead to a deficiency. So that's sort of the mechanism behind that, and that's why we look at it as a potential problem or deficiency in people with carcinoid syndrome or those types of NETs. Not everybody with carcinoid syndrome will definitely have a deficiency of niacin, but it's potentially a group of people who should think about, yes, taking a supplement, what we call prophylactically, which means taking it in anticipation that you're either with a deficiency or at risk. It's probably not something we routinely test for, to be honest. You can do a 24-hour urine collection to check, but not many centres, even in Australia or around the world, test it routinely. Because it's a water-soluble vitamin, it's quite a safe supplement to take, even just as a in-case type thing. So some people like taking a B complex vitamin, which has got B3, B6, B12 and a few other ones in there, which is fine. We don't have heaps of evidence about how much people need to take to prevent a deficiency in that case, but they tend to suggest, from a couple of studies I've seen, anywhere from 25 to 40 milligrams a day. So look, one tablet, depending how much the volume is of the, because they all vary depending on the brand, would be fine. If you're someone who's got bad carcinoid syndrome and your doctor has decided to test you and you do come back as deficient through the testing, you may need a higher dose. But for people that haven't had a test and are just kind of making the assumption they're at risk or wanting to just cover themselves, that lower dose of sort of 20 to 40 is probably safer. You'll basically pee out any excess if you've already got enough in your body. So there's no risk in terms of toxicity too much. In terms of foods, that's a really good question. So I guess with any vitamins, the question is, can we just get it from our diet if we change what we eat? The answer is yes, technically, but I suppose because of that mechanism I described, a lot of the niacin we actually use in our body for normal processes is converted from amino acids. So we actually need that process to happen to get niacin. We don't solely get niacin from our diet. So you could eat things that had niacin in them, and it's actually very general foods. It's things like meat, chicken, fish, milk. It's nothing special. It's probably standard things that most people who eat those foods. Legumes, I think, is one of them if you're sort of a meat-free eater. But you probably couldn't correct a deficiency or risk of deficiency through diet alone. Yeah.
Well, that's really useful, and thank you for clarifying that, Erin. Could I just ask you if you can tell us, well, what would be the symptoms? So if someone's got carcinoid syndrome and they're not taking a niacin supplement, then, well, maybe they should be on a low dose supplement anyway, is what I'm hearing. But if you've had carcinoid syndrome, a lot of people have had carcinoid syndrome for years before they get their diagnosis of NET. So obviously they haven't thought to supplement niacin, what would be the symptoms? Like, how would you know if you had a deficiency, apart from doing the urine test, or the 24-hour urine collection, which is obviously really quite complex to arrange? What would be the symptoms?
Yeah,
And I
I
can
mean,
just see someone's actually asked that question. I'm
yeah,
obviously a mind reader because someone's just put that in the comments. So that's good. I'm glad I was thinking
and
of the right things.
yeah, and I've been asked a lot recently about the itch kind of, or like the skin irritation that sort of some people get with carcinoid syndrome, that wonder if that's related to a B3 or niacin deficiency. So that's potentially one. I guess with vitamins, there's sort of two levels of deficiency, or sort of low levels. So I guess if you test someone that the result comes back as low, they could also feel totally fine. So that's almost what we'd call an asymptomatic sort of low level or deficiency, which means it's probably a relatively mild to moderate case. I mean, people with more severe deficiencies is when they actually start to exhibit symptoms with vitamin deficiencies. Pellagra is the official name for like a clinical type niacin deficiency, but very small proportions of NET patients have that. So I can assure most people of that it's probably a low chance of getting as severe as that condition. But some of those symptoms are associated with skin changes, so some pigmental changes, or sort of, sensation of the skin. So they call it a type of dermatitis. So that's sort of
I think I'm going to pull you up because you used a really medical word, which makes sense to me, but it might not make sense to our listeners, which is pigmental. So can you tell us what
pigmentation, as in the color of your skin might change a little bit. So it's sort of, there's evidence in the research for sort of changes in sort of discoloration of the skin, so it might go a little bit darker. And the sensation of the skin might change. And then sort of mood changes, bit of confusion, those sorts of things, but that would be more in a very severe case. Probably the most common I've heard of is that kind of itchiness, sort of skin irritation. Otherwise, you may feel nothing. Like I said, you could still have an underlying deficiency that probably does still need to be corrected, because if left for a long period of time, could get worse. But you may actually have no symptoms. And that's the problem. Sometimes people, are best to, if you suspect, or if your doctor says, you've got quite bad carcinoid syndrome, or if you're someone like, give an example of Kate that's had it for a long time, before diagnosis, take a supplement and try and get on top of it, even if you feel well.
Because it sounds like taking the supplement's going to be low risk. So no, that's really useful. And I just anecdotally, I just thought it might be useful for me to mention, like when I talk with patients about, often people will contact me and we'll talk about skin itch, and I've suggested, I've referred them to the information on our website, which Erin has very generously contributed hugely to, and they've taken a niacin supplement. I've got a few patients where that itch has actually been relieved within, a week or two of starting to take that supplement, which sort of is suggestive either it's a really great psychological antidote, or that there may have been a niacin deficiency. So thank you for clearing that up for us, and that's really useful. Along with, we've talked about niacin, but there was a question in the webinar about potassium. So can I ask you whether potassium is a common deficiency in NETs and people with various types of NETs?
With NETs in general, no, not that I'm aware of. It hasn't been well studied, but in terms of what I've seen through the clinics that I cover and what I know, the main people we see with low electrolytes, which includes potassium, so your electrolytes are sort of potassium, phosphate, and sodium, so salt in your blood, which are all essential electrolytes that we need. More people with diarrhea. So if you've got really severe diarrhea, you're losing obviously a lot of fluid through your bowel, but you lose a lot of electrolytes too, because the electrolytes are sitting in that fluid in your bowel. And what your large bowel does mostly is help absorb a lot of that fluid that once it gets to the end of the gut, and those electrolytes, including potassium. So if you're someone with really bad diarrhea, particularly watery diarrhea, it's likely you're losing a lot of potassium and electrolytes, and you may need to think about replacing those. They're very easily tested through blood if you're really concerned, or your doctor wants to check that to see if you're low. And in terms of supplements, potassium's a very easy one to take. There's like soluble, as in it dissolves in water, that you can drink. and tablets you can take. Probably the main net type that's particularly at risk of low potassium is vipomas, that have that really watery diarrhea, for the main reason that you get a lot of losses, like I said. I had one recently that I saw at Peter Mac who, actually had low potassium when they tested her, and she had a new vipoma because she just was getting so frequent bowel motions and just losing. So it's more about losses with potassium as to why people are low.
And just eating food that's rich in potassium, is that a good idea if you're a person who gets a lot of diarrhea?
Look, it's worthwhile. Yeah, so pretty much all your fruits and veggies are high in potassium. Your tomatoes, potatoes, most of your other citrus and fruits and vegetables, green leafy vegetables. So it's worthwhile. However, it's probably, again, unlikely that if...
Oh, we've lost sound. Can I just check? Oh, I can hear you now, Erin. Can you just say, oh no? Maybe if people could just put in the comments whether they can keep talking, Erin. Just maybe give us a testing. It's just gone to mute again. And
there we go. My AirPods cut out. Sorry.
Oh, that's okay. No, look, this is the way of it, isn't it? I think one of the things about COVID is that it's made us a lot more understanding of some of the technological hitches that can happen. So I can hear you fine. So that's great. And we were talking about potassium-rich foods and...
Yeah, fruits and veggies, green leafy vegetables. May not correct a deficiency though. So if you're someone with severe watery diarrhea, just eating high potassium foods, it's helpful, but it probably won't completely replace the potassium that you need. You may potentially need to take potassium supplement as well.
And it's been a very long time since I worked in a ward as a nurse with people who had potassium deficiencies, but my very vague recollection is that that's a little bit more of a nuanced thing to try and replace. So it's probably one to talk with your doctor about. Would I be right in terms of taking supplements?
Yeah, so look, high doses can have a bad effect on your heart. So you certainly don't want to be going nuts on the supplements at home without checking at least with your GP that what you're taking safe and the type of mode of supplement safe, definitely. Yeah.
And I was going to ask you, Erin, if you're a person who has the occasional bout of revolting, severe diarrhea, is it worth doing, taking some of those over-the-counter rehydration solutions or sports drinks or those sorts of things? Do they help with this?
Yeah, look, potentially. And some of the ones, I suppose things like Gatorade and Powerade are not actually ideal. They're sort of marketed as electrolyte and sort of oral rehydration solutions, but they're really very high in sugar, so you're probably not going to get the absorption of the electrolytes that they contain as well. Your ones are better off access from the chemists, like Gastrolyte and Hydrolyte. They've actually got a really good concentration of electrolyte, salts, and a little bit of sugar in them. So if you're someone who's losing a lot of fluid through your bowel, through diarrhea, or even if you have sort of intermittent bouts of bad diarrhea, I've said to a couple of people recently, even sort of half your daily fluid intake with those electrolyte solutions, particularly through bad episodes of diarrhea, is not a bad idea. So then you're at least replacing some of those losses. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. And actually, this is really interesting for me because these are questions that have crossed my mind for a long time, but I'm feeling very pleased that I've got you captive so I can actually ask you these questions. So thank you for being so patient. Another question that came up during the webinar, and just a reminder to people who are watching live, there's lots of positive comments for people who are finding this really informative. So thank you for the encouraging words, and that's great that we're hitting the spot. But if there's more questions that you thought of since the webinar, or there's things that are current for you right now, please do feel free to put them in the comments. Otherwise, I will just keep going with the questions that came up in the webinar and supplement them with my own. And the next question is really around muscle loss, which we talked about during the webinar. I know the technical word for that is sarcopenia, and I can't quite remember the context, but someone did put a little question in saying, is the muscle loss due to a reduction in exercise or a side effect of the NET, or maybe related to treatment? So I don't know if you can remember what we were talking about when that came through, Erin, but I know muscle loss is an issue in lots of cancers, and so maybe you could comment about that.
Yep. So for those, I guess, that haven't watched the webinar, some of the results I presented, so I recorded the weight of NET patients over a period of 6 months, but also we looked at their body composition. So we put them on body composition scales and measured their lean body mass, which essentially means their muscle mass, and whether that changed over time. And there was high proportions of people that lost weight. So I think it was close to sort of 45% had lost some weight, close to sort of at least 1% up to one person lost 20% of their body weight. So a big range there. But there was a group of people that, I think it was about a quarter of the group that we studied that lost muscle when we put them on the body composition scales, but actually had a stable weight. So there was obviously that underlying or sort of in the background loss of muscle, even though their total weight stayed the same, and potentially, you know, that's at risk of not being identified too well. The reason that's the case, it's a really good question. It could be all of the above that person sort of mentioned. So it's sort of, it could be, yes, it can be treatment related, I guess, with any cancer treatment. And I guess sarcopenia, as in underlying muscle loss, is common to a degree in cancer generally. I guess it's a general flag that even if your weight is stable, still be conscious of how do your muscles feel? How is your strength in general? You know, is there a reduction there? You're looking at yourself in the mirror and you look just a little bit less conditioned or sort of muscle tone than you would normally, even though your weight on the scales has stayed fairly the same. Because you can get this phenomenon of losing muscle but building a little bit of fat, particularly in the case of exercising less. So I think when people are, yes, less active, more sedentary, not doing their usual exercise regime, which can be quite common when you're having treatment for various reasons, or even if you've just got a NET that's, you know, causing a lot of symptoms that's stopping you from going out as often as you would normally go out. I mean, I speak to a lot of patients who have diarrhea or have, you know, symptoms where they probably just can't leave the house as much as they normally would, you know, go for their walk the dog or go to the gym. So I think it's a couple of factors. Yes, exercising less, you're obviously not using your muscles as much. They're more likely to become weaker and deconditioned. Also, some treatments have an increased need for sort of protein just to sort of help the body get through treatment and healing process, which therefore means, you know, if you're not meeting that increased protein need, you can get a little bit of muscle loss as a result. So it could be a couple of factors. It's hard to say one particularly, but I say to people, if
we've lost you again. Take them out.
Okay.
Ditch the iPods, the earpods, the pods.
So I was saying basically people, you know, if you can do some activity and maintain that safely and comfortably, you know, you're not too fatigued, then do, because I think that's very beneficial. But as I said, look at yourself in the mirror, even if you're steady on the scales, and just sort of decide whether, you know, you think you are losing a bit of muscle or deconditioning a little bit. And if you're concerned, talk to your doctor.
Fantastic. And maybe I was going to leave this bit till last because it was a bit of a plug, but maybe it's good to talk about it now because, and we referred to this during the webinar, but the Clinical Oncology Society of Australia have a NET special interest group. So that's a professional organisation that has a multidisciplinary membership. So anyone who's like a doctor or a nurse or a dietitian or an exercise physiologist or a psychologist, or, you know, all of the various people involved in cancer care can be members of COSA, and there's a NET special interest group, and we've been rewriting the guidelines for the management of NETs because that was well out of date. But one of the really exciting things that we've been able to do, and Erin and I have been working on this together a lot, which has been really special and lovely, is a new chapter in those guidelines on supportive care. And there's certainly a section of that on diet, but there's also a section, or there's a section on psychosocial care, which is where I have been able to contribute a bit, but also a new section on exercise physiology, which is really the first thing that we've seen written on in relation to exercise physiology and NET. So I'm hopeful that information, that combination of information, will be helpful for doctors, but also we're hopefully writing this in a way that will be accessible and readable for patients as well. I don't know if you want to make any more comments about that, Erin, and in terms of the management, like what we do if you're losing muscle mass?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's a really good point, and I think these new guidelines will be fabulous because there's very little supportive care guidance for health professionals and patients really in a lot of net guidelines generally around the world. So I think it's really nice that the Australian guidelines are going to be incorporating it and sort of starting off that trend. But look, it's really a combination. So I definitely don't want to say that diet's the most important when it comes to managing muscle mass and muscle loss, or exercise is most important. It's probably a combination of both, as well as, if there's factors inhibiting you from exercise, and, if there's symptom factors, or it's, energy levels or mood, there's then again further supportive care and psychosocial support that you need, or medical care. So look, it's a very much, I think, a team approach, managing things such as sort of deconditioning muscle loss. It's a combination of exercise needs and recommendations, diet, making sure you're eating a healthy diet, eating enough food, keeping a stable weight, eating protein, but also, getting targeted exercise, strategies and education, whether that's through an exercise physiologist or physio. Hopefully those guidelines will give some tips on how to access that as well. Yeah.
I was just going to ask along with that, Erin, a lot of people in our community and our patient community talk about ways that they are changing their diet. And sometimes it's in, they've done a food and symptom diary and worked out that actually, no, life is not fun if I eat tomatoes, or life becomes really untenable if I have coffee or whatever. But there's also, I think, a significant number of people in our patient groups who talk about cutting some foods out in the thought that perhaps that will help their cancer or make their treatment more effective. And so some of the comments that, I read about are things like going vegan, going keto, going gluten-free, going lactose-free. And I just wondered if, because we've been talking about muscle loss, but also, about vitamins and minerals and deficiencies, whether those sorts of diets, is there any risks with those sorts of diets in terms of creating some of those issues?
Definitely, potentially. It probably depends how restrictive they are. I mean, in general, for anyone with a cancer, undergoing cancer treatment, as dietitians, we try to advocate for as least restrictive diets as possible. You want to get as much variety and balance in there to get a combination of, amino acids, vitamins and minerals, making sure you're meeting all those healthy nutrient needs for yourself, but also for recovery from cancer treatment as well, and living well too. The problem with diets such as, paleo, which sort of cuts out a lot of dairy, carbohydrates, those sorts of things. These are major essential nutrients, basically. So in the short term, there's not a whole lot of damage to be done. And people do claim they feel better. And look, I guess my argument always is to people, it's always up to you. If you swear by them and you feel really good and you've got no reasons that it's unsafe for you, obviously, if you're going to go on an extreme diet, check it with your doctor, particularly your oncologist, because they'll know what treatments you're on, if any, what other symptoms you've got, and if there's any risks to that, or your dietitian if you've got one that you can contact. But problems with such like paleo, you're cutting out major food groups like all your carbohydrates, grains, etc., dairy foods, which has got carbohydrates, calcium, etc., high in protein. Then you've got ketogenic diet, which cuts out, again, a lot of your carbohydrates as well, and focuses heavily on fat and protein intake. One thing about carbohydrates, we've got no evidence for that sugars increase risk of cancer. It's a huge myth that's out there on the internet, and we get asked about that a lot at Peter Mac when we see patients, but please don't be stressed about sugar. There's lab research going on really about how cancer cells sort of use sugar and how they grow, but what we eat really shouldn't, in the basic form of pasta, rice, or foods containing sugars really shouldn't affect cancer growth that we know of. So that's not a reason to go on those diets unless you absolutely want to. But yeah, you're missing out on lots of other nutrition. So there's lots of vitamins and minerals that are contained in carbohydrates and grains and dairy. So that's a major concern. So long term, your brain also uses carbohydrate as its preferential sort of preferred type of energy. So people can over time get, fatigue and sort of fuzziness and sort of their mental capacity can be a little bit reduced because they're not getting that efficient energy source to the brain, and also vital organs through low carbohydrate intake. So just be conscious of that as well.
So it sounds like it's proceed with caution and talk with your dietitian and your doctor. And one thing that I'm just going to add to this, and I'm going to come to a question that's come through in the feed, but I've had some really fantastic help from pharmacists as well in terms of supplements. So a lot of people are sort of, there's some questions around interactions of supplements with various forms of chemotherapy or other treatments. And so don't forget about your pharmacist as a really, really useful resource when you're searching for information about all of these things. Peter Mac, sorry, this is another plug, but Peter Mac do have a pharmacy information service and they're so generous because they will take inquiries from all over Australia. So it's not just, you don't have to be a Peter Mac patient to receive that advice. So I'll make sure I put a link to that in the notes shortly. And they're just, like, I've just had such good, so like usually they get back to me within about half an hour with an answer of these sorts of questions. So they're fantastic. Someone did write in, and we were on the topic of sugar, and I thought, oh, let's put this question in now. This person has said, I crave sugar, but then if I eat anything sweet, it makes me feel nauseous or nauseated. I have never had a sweet tooth until recently. Could this be related to my NETs? And she's just observed that she's talked to other people who've had the same kind of craving for sugar, but then feeling afterwards.
If you're eating really refined sugar, so like, you know, stuff that's got lots of like white sugar, sort of, you know, sugar that's contained in lollies and cakes and confectionery and that sort of thing, you might just be getting a bit of a sugar rush that's making you nauseous if you're eating a lot of those foods. If it's related to your NET, it's probably really hard for me to say without knowing much about your diagnosis and, you know, what treatment you're on. There's no association that I know of between types of NETs and either particular sugar cravings or an intolerance to kind of a large amount of sweet foods or sugars.
So if someone's getting a sugar craving, and you know, who doesn't get sugar cravings? I just have to say, but if you're getting a sugar craving and you sort of know that if I go for the bag of jelly beans, I'm probably going to feel afterwards. You know, I know that too much sugar can actually stimulate diarrhea too, because we want to really avoid that with NETs. But what's going to help that craving if you're not going to reach for the bag of jelly beans, but you want to go a slightly more sustainable, sustained energy option that might still address the craving? What would be your suggestions?
Yeah, so I guess you're just looking for alternatives that still have a sweet taste but aren't just pure sugar, because I guess the things about lollies and chocolates and those ice creams and things, there's really not much else in them apart from sugar, although ice cream's got a little bit of dairy in it. But so if you've got something else that, you know, fruit, I guess everyone probably thinks it's such a bore to say eat fruit, but it is sweet technically. So, you know, start with fruit. If that can satisfy you, brilliant, because at least you're getting some vitamins and minerals from it and it's relatively healthy. You know, think about things like muesli bars and things with a bit of honey in them. You know, things that are sweet but not just your pure sugar foods. Because I guess even something like, I mean, muesli bars vary a lot, for example. Some are very high in sugar, so they're probably not that healthy for you. Some not so much, but they've got nuts and oats and other things in them that probably balance out that sugar. So the other thing to keep in mind is that sugar sort of surge and rush that often people get when they eat something high in sugar. If you actually have something that's high in protein or fat with that, it actually reduces that surge in sugar in the gut. So let's say you had a smoothie that could be sweetened with fruit and that sort of thing, because you've got milk with it. You know, if you put some nuts in it and that it should actually reduce that sort of sugar surge that you might otherwise get if you ate a really big sort of bowl of fruit. So hopefully that's helpful. Yeah,
I think that's really great advice. So thank you, Erin. You just mentioned fat, and I really wanted to make sure we talked about this because it is such a common thing for people who are on a NET treatment called somatostatin analogues to have a little bit of trouble with digesting fats. And so it's a conversation that comes up frequently in the group, and there is another video on Crayon and somatostatin analog side effects, but you know, we've got the dietitian in the room. So I just wanted to talk with you briefly about that and just ask, how common is it that people on these treatments get fat malabsorption, and how would you know that you've got fat malabsorption?
Yeah. if you look at the literature, so what people have sort of published research about, they would say not too common, that it happens, that sort of side effect from taking the injections or having them as a treatment leading to malabsorption of fat. But I probably see it quite commonly. Maybe it's because the people that are referred to see me are the ones particularly with issues. But a lot of patients that I see have particularly in that week after their injection, sort of a reaction where they feel sort of crampy, they've got worsening diarrhea, almost like they're on the injections to help their overall diarrhea, but they still get that sort of immediate worsening in that week post the injection. And the reason being is because the injections are designed to help suppress the hormones released from the net, which helps with symptoms in general. But as a result, it can have a general hormonal reduction and enzyme effect on the pancreas, which is used heavily for digestion. So the pancreas releases lots of enzymes and hormones to help us digest our food. And these injections can stop the pancreas doing that efficiently, particularly in that week or so after the injection. And the result of that is that you tend to sort of malabsorb things, particularly fats, after, and that can lead to diarrhea. What it actually looks like, so not everybody gets these obvious symptoms of fat malabsorption, but if you're looking out for signs, your poo should look more pale than normal. It might float, it might be really hard to flush, could look oily or foamy. Some people describe like a mucus, or it's just sort of kind of a mushy consistency that floats. I know it's very descriptive. I'm used to talking about poo a lot as a dietitian, but don't be afraid to describe what it looks like when you see either a dietitian or a doctor is one thing I will say, because a lot of patients sort of go, oh, you don't want to hear what it looks like, but I do, because it really does help us, assess what's going on. How your poo looks tells a lot about your diet, and also how your gut is digesting your diet. So it is important to keep an eye out on what your poo looks like. But yeah, look, if it's pale, if it's floating, mushy, oily, that tends to indicate you've got more fat in there than should be there, that actually should be absorbing. So that can indicate that you might need to talk to your doctor about how to treat some fat malabsorption that might be occurring.
And Erin, we've talked a lot about in the support group about Crayon, and a lot of people are on Crayon. If you're only getting like a few days of that kind of symptom after your injection each month, do you sort of need to go on to Crayon, or like at what point should you be asking your doctor about Crayon if you're experiencing that, I guess is my question.
Two reasons. So if you're really affected by that diarrhea in that week, so if it's stopping you from going out, if it's upsetting you and that it's affecting your quality of life, yes, Crayon, we have patients who are just on Crayon for that week after their injection, just for a week, just to manage that period. Then they don't need to take it for the other 3 weeks, for example. So that's definitely one reason. If it's affecting you and the diarrhea is sort of stopping you from eating or socializing that week or feeling well, then yes, Crayon can definitely help to get you out and about again. Or if you're losing weight, because often if you're losing a lot of fat through your bowel, that fat that's normally absorbed is giving you calories. So if you're losing it all through your bowel, we sometimes see people losing weight, and that can be the reason, because they're actually not absorbing all the fat that they're eating. So there are a couple of good reasons that you should talk to your doctor, even if you only temporarily get that bout of diarrhea for sort of a week or a few days. It's just about how much it's affecting you, really, because I've talked to people who have that bout of diarrhea after their injection, but they sort of go, oh, it doesn't trouble me too much. I sort of get to it.
I was going to ask if there's any side effects or bad things that can happen if you're on Crayon.
Sorry, Kate, you just cut out, I think.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Got you. Yeah.
Oh, beautiful. Okay. Gee, we're having a few little technical hitches today. School holidays my end, so it might be my internet with a teenager and Netflix. Anyway, probably more like they're Zooming with their friends. Anyway, that's enough about me. I was going to ask about side effects from using Crayon, or bad things that can happen if you're on Crayon. Are there any reactions that people can have, or side effects?
Yeah, definitely. They're probably uncommon, but I have seen some people that have started taking Crayon and they actually find the diarrhea is worse. That's probably a fairly uncommon side effect. And then I've got other people that go completely the opposite direction and get very constipated and then don't feel well either, so they sort of don't want to take it. of all the patients I've had on Crayon, that's a very small proportion of people that have had a bad side effect from it. So it's probably uncommon. But if you feel worse taking Crayon, go straight to your doctor and let them know, because it's meant to be helping you, basically. Most people should have an improvement in their symptoms. There isn't, Crayon's one brand of pancreatic enzymes. There are other brands that you can try that you might tolerate better. So check that with your doctor as well.
Fantastic. Okay, so the questions are coming thick and fast now, which is really great, but I'm also looking at the time and hoping that we'll get through them. And this is actually a question that lots of people have that I get too. Issues with blood sugars. So this person has said, Satastatin sent my blood sugar through the roof. Can I get it under control? I know people who have diabetes who have gone on to a somatostatin analog like Sandostatin or lanreotide and had all sorts of problems with their blood sugars. Is there a tell us what you think?
Yeah, and look, it's for the same reason that I say you can be at risk of malabsorbing fat. So that's because the enzymes are inhibited a bit through that injection immediately after. Your pancreas also releases hormones. So insulin and glucagon are hormones that control our blood sugar levels that are released from the pancreas. So they're probably being affected by the injection, and that's leading to a change in your blood sugar levels. I would report it as long as your doctor knows about it. If not, report it straight to them, because they need to know any adverse events or side effects from any treatment you're having, and that includes injections. In terms of what to do, I mean, if your sugars are going really high, I'm assuming that was the problem in this case. They were going too high.
It sounds like they're going really high, but I've had a couple of other patients who've had hypos. So I think it's sort of both directions, it seems to be.
Yeah. So what you do diet-wise depends which way they're going. So if they're going really high, you probably just have to be a little bit more conscious of what your carbohydrate and sugar intake is. So focus less on those refined sugars, which can increase your sugars quickly through the diet, and but still you can still eat rices, pasta, bread, but just not huge amounts of it at one time, and sort of load your body up, particularly if there's that short-term effect after your injection. If you go low, the opposite is sort of true. You want to be having some quick-acting sugars on hand to sort of address any sort of hypos or low blood sugar levels if they happen, but it may not just be resolved through diet. So you may be, if you're already on any diabetes medication, they may have to adjust it. So that's hence something to talk to your doctor or endocrinologist about. If you need support of diet as well as the medication management, if your doctor feels that way, that's when the dietitian can sort of step in and modify your diet a bit. But really, depending whether it's high or low, it's either slightly less or sort of carbohydrates spread out over the day, or it's sort of having those carbohydrate foods on hand to sort of help boost your sugars if they're sort of sitting low.
So it sounds complex and something that you should be definitely getting some help to manage. Yeah. Okay. So look, I'll give you this question, and it may be because I know that we've got a little bit of a time deadline, and I don't want to keep you any longer than we are able to. I'm going to read this question out, and we might need to see if you can answer it offline, perhaps, Erin, if it's too complicated to cover. The question is, in recent research, it stated that there are enzymes from the liver for the large bowel to work properly so as to avoid constipation. Can you explain a bit about this? I'm not on any medication.
So there's enzymes released from the liver that help digestion. Is that the question?
This is the question that the person has put in the box, and it might be too much of a complex thing to launch into right at the end of our chat.
It's probably a little bit tricky to answer without a little bit more information on what they're referring to in terms of how digestion works in the gut. So most of our nutrients get absorbed in the small bowel. By the time food hits the large bowel, it's mostly water and electrolytes and salts that get reabsorbed. So what the pancreas releases most of the enzymes and hormones needed for that main digestion to occur in the small bowel. But by the large bowel, it should just be mostly water being reabsorbed and electrolytes and salts. But in terms of, the liver also produces many things, including, bile, which helps with fat absorption. So I'm not sure if that's what they're referring to. That's not an enzyme per se, but might need a little bit more information, but
Yeah,
happy to,
so
yeah. Fine.
it might be well, this is a good question for your doctor or for your dietitian,
Yeah.
perhaps to follow up on. And that's really the question that I wanted to end on today, Erin, which is, you know, so often we in these questions and answers things, we often say, oh, you'll have to talk to your doctor or your dietitian about this. How we know that, you know, you're in Melbourne and actually you're about to go on maternity leave. So we're extra especially grateful that we got to talk with you before you disappear into babyland for a while. But we've also got a NET specialist dietitian in Sydney, Kaylee Schneid, who can do telehealth consultations around Australia, which is really fantastic. But if you're talking to a local dietitian or the dietitian that's attached to your hospital, how would you know, like, that if they know about NETs, or if they seemed like they were out of their depth, if they'd never heard of Crayon for, you know, fat malabsorption because of somatostatin analogues, and, you know, that's a fairly niche kind of area. How would you know, and what would you do also if they felt like they were out of their depth? What's the next steps?
Yeah, and look, it's a really good question, because I suppose we are a little bit short on dietitian expertise, specifically in NETs in Australia. I really hope that changes and more people kind of grow an interest and expertise. But yeah, look, if you can't access a specialist NET dietitian, obviously if you're treated through Peter Mac, I meet most of the patients in the NET unit there. Except for when I'm on maternity leave. When I return, I will be. And obviously,
and they're doing it, replacing someone in your role with something.
Yeah. So there are other dietitians at PEDMAC who know how to manage NET. So it's certainly not just me. Yeah, there will be someone covering the NET unit there. So if you are a PEDMAC patient, rest assured, someone will be looking after you, and they know how to do that really well. And then obviously Kaylee being available too. But look, if you don't have access to a sort of specialist NET dietitian, a dietitian in general, so if you're being treated through a hospital, someone who's got some cancer experience in general is much better than someone without any cancer experience. What a lot of dietitians do around Australia as well is we benchmark with each other, and we talk to each other, and we send emails, and we ask questions if we've got tricky cases that we're not sure about. So I would encourage your dietitian to contact, you know, Peter Mac or another. So the two ENET Centre of Excellences in Australia are Royal North Shore in Sydney and also Peter Mac in Melbourne. So if you've got a dietitian at a health service that's not sure sort of what advice to give you or where to start in terms of resources, you can direct them to those centres to ask questions, whether it's of the medical teams or dietitians. I'm sure they'd be willing to assist. The Neuroendocrine Cancer Australia website's also got some resources on nutrition, so booklets that Kelly and I have contributed to about some general practical strategies. You know, you can access them yourselves as patients off the website, but if that's a good place to start and show the dietitian those that you're seeing and say that they're available. When we have the COSA guideline up and running, I would definitely mention that as well. That'll, I'm sure, be disseminated through Neuroendocrine Cancer Australia as soon as that's available. So say to the dietitian, there's a guideline if you want to, you know, refer to that, or you can bring it with you yourself. So there's ways to sort of prompt that. But look, some dietitians don't come across NETs very often, so you can't blame them for not knowing too well how to manage them, because it can be a very specific need for patients. But look, there are resources out there, and hopefully health professionals are talking to each other. I'm hoping to do a little bit more work and research down the track when I'm back at it on finding ways to disseminate information more broadly to dietitians, whether that's through our National Dietitians Association and other places where most dietitians are registered through, to really raise the awareness of nutrition needs in NETs. So watch this space, but for the moment, yeah, look, do your best to source your own information from those places, but encourage that person to seek advice from others that might know a little bit more.
Brilliant. Okay. Look, I think that's where we'll need to leave it today, because, and Erin, thank you. I know that you've got a toddler having a nap and a long list of things to do before he wakes up. So I'm crossing my fingers it's a long nap. Erin, I know we talked about me turning off the live feed and then turning off the Zoom, but we're going to do it the other way around, because there's a couple of things that I want to update the support group about, and I don't want to keep you any longer. So can we just there's lots of people saying thank you through the comments, and we're so grateful to you for your passion and all of your work that you've put in over the last few years in creating this knowledge around nets and diet. And it's just such an incredible resource, not only for Australia, but for people worldwide who are really grappling. You know, we know we can treat tumours pretty effectively, but if people aren't living well with these tumours, then we're really only doing half of the job. And so it's been so exciting for me watching this evidence emerge, and the level of knowledge about how to do this well and how to live well in relation to our guts and diet and nets. So thank you so much. We're so grateful. And look, from all of us at Neuroendocrine Cancer Australia, we're just wishing you all the very best for your new bubba. And we would love to stay tuned for any happy announcements, and I'll share it with everybody. But yeah, all the best. I hope that that new season for you that's coming up is a really special one for you and your family, and we'll look forward to seeing you on the other side. And rest assured, everybody, that we'll let you know when Erin's back up for taking referrals, but that I know there's other things to focus on now. So thank you so much, Erin. I'll let you press the little red button to
Thanks, Kate. You're welcome. And thank you, everyone. I hope you found it useful, and it's been a pleasure to sort of give you information today. Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye.
Excellent. Okay, so I'm still with you, hopefully, if that's worked, because I just wanted to just give a couple of little plugs before we finish off today. The first thing is Facebook Friday next week. I'm really delighted that we've got Desiree Stevenson. Desiree has been part of our broader community for some time, with her husband Paul having been diagnosed many years ago with NETs. And Paul actually volunteers for the organisation as our treasurer, which is extraordinary. But Desiree, being a carer of someone with NETs and having lived that for a very long time, I think it's, I was talking with Desiree a few weeks ago about some of the ways that they manage Paul's condition, both as a couple, but also in terms of the context of their friendships and work and sort of broader life, their parenting. And I was just really keen to give her a chance to share some of that sort of collective, that wisdom that she's collected over the years. She's got a really great way of expressing herself, and she gave me some great thoughts and really interesting and important things to think about. So I was keen to have her on as a guest. So she's going to come in next week to Facebook Friday. So stay tuned for announcements about that. The other thing that I just wanted to mention was that we're wrapping up our final support group meetings for the year. So there's been quite a few this week. But if you're in Victoria or Tasmania, Tasmanians are invited to our Melbourne group next week. So we've got a meeting on Tuesday afternoon. So if you haven't got, actually I haven't sent out the link yet to the Melbourne group, so don't worry if you're in the Melbourne group and you haven't received that yet. It's on today's list. But if you're not getting updates about support group meetings and you're in Victoria and you're keen to join in on those Zoom meetings, then let me know. My email address is kate@neuroendocrine.org.au, and if you let me know, I can actually make sure that you're on that email list, so you get the links to the meetings and that sort of thing. The other thing just to mention is that we've got one more Zoom meeting. So our Facebook group, a Facebook private discussion group, every month have a chance to talk sort of via Zoom, live in person on the screen, and then there's one further meeting which is on the final day of our office being open, which is the 22nd of December. So we're hoping that that'll be a really nice chance to connect one more time before Christmas. So just to let you know about that. And the only other thing I wanted to talk about was that over the weekend, I'm going to be doing an extra long run along the Birra Run, which is a virtual Melbourne Marathon event. Normally Melbourne Marathon is in October, but obviously due to COVID, they had to pull the pin on that one, but they're running it as a virtual event. So I am going to be doing my half marathon, which is 21.1 every step of the 21.1 Ks. I'll be running that along the river on the weekend, probably Sunday, I think, at this point, with one of our volunteers who's actually coming along for the ride, which is very wonderful to have some company on that long run. So I know that lots of people have supported that, but I will put a link to in the notes. Also, if you feel like just getting out and doing something in solidarity on the day, you know, you're welcome to do that. Stick a photo of you, you know, do a selfie, put it in the support group space if you like. And no doubt there'll be some very unflattering and undignified photos to share with you afterwards. And so I'm doing that as a fundraiser for neuroendocrine cancer. So yeah, I just thought I'd let you know that's what we're doing on the weekend. I hope you all have a great weekend. I know it's getting busy in the lead up to Christmas, and lots of people with COVID restrictions kind of easing in lots of places. Lots of things have kind of recommenced where maybe they'd been in recess for a while. So I just wanted to give you a shout out as life can feel a bit busy and overwhelming in December, and just remind us all that it's okay to say no, or not yet, or not now, or maybe can we do something smaller, or maybe I won't bring any food to this event, or whatever it is, just to ease a little bit of that personal pressure and tension. It can be a tough time. And along with that, if you're feeling overwhelmed or stressed, or you've got questions, then you're always welcome to make contact with me. So I'll make sure my contact details are in the notes. I'm not going to read out a phone number because I'm notoriously bad at remembering it, but you know that I'm still in the office for a good couple of weeks yet, and I'll be really happy to chat about whatever's going on for you and help connect you in with the right sorts of supports and information as the day requires. So look, thank you everybody for joining me. I'm just having a quick look at my list of things to chat about to make sure I've covered them all, and I'm pretty sure I have. So I'll stop yabbering. Have a great week, and it's been really lovely to connect with everybody today. Thanks.